the great educators of humanity, the great university professors, they speak of evidence concerning everything else except the resurrection. Because to believe the resurrection is to believe everything Jesus said. And to believe everything Jesus said would condemn them to judgment or release them to life everlasting by putting their faith in the Jesus that they're trying to say nobody can prove existed. How can any of us believe the first president of America was George Washington? How could any of us believe that you can study DNA and find out that you're 3% Jewish, 4% Turkish, 5% Greek, and you believe it? You follow the DNA evidence for everything except the resurrection. We follow the DNA evidence to find a criminal. We follow the DNA evidence to find who our relatives are, our ancestors. We follow the DNA evidence to crack any code, to break through any barrier, to prove any fact, except the one thing that is the most obvious thing in the universe is the one thing that the science and that the leaders of education and knowledge refuse to treat as fact, because they refuse to deal with it scientifically, yet they deal with everything else scientifically, except that one thing. The point is that if he said he would rise from the dead, and then in fact did, we should take him at his word concerning every promise that he ever made. A stone removed, impossible except by God. Empty tomb, impossible except by Jesus. Roman guards ran away, impossible unless they had no explanation. Empty grave clothes, neatly folded by the God who is not a God of confusion, but a God of order. Amen. Make your bed, people. Jesus made his. 500 eyewitnesses. 50 hours of eyewitness testimony. Why am I saying these things? Why aren't we just like, woo, we believe in the resurrection? Because I don't want you to believe in a myth. I want you to believe in fact. I want you to believe in science. Christianity does not oppose science. Philosophy that is unprovable opposes Christianity, but true science supports it. It would have been the most lopsided trial in all of history if you had to try to disprove that Jesus rose from the dead. And the greatest evidence of all was the changed lives. The hardest people to convince in our lives about anything is our family members. And yet Jesus' brothers who refused to believe in him while he was alive became disciples once they realized he was risen from the dead. The cowardly disciples who all ran away from him at the cross, only John and Jesus' mother and the other girl, another Mary. We don't know how many Marys were in there, but there was Mary and another Mary and John. Everybody else ran away. And yet, after the resurrection, at the cross, they ran away for the persecution that they would experience because they were watching Jesus get crucified. But then when he rose from the dead, you couldn't get them to shut up. They beat Peter, they beat John, they whipped them, they tortured them, they put them in boiling oil. They crucified Peter upside down because they were going to crucify him on a cross. And he said, no, thank you. I will not die in the same manner that my Savior died. Turn me upside down and I will be crucified on a cross upside down. What? This guy, remember him? Get behind me, Satan, that guy. The guy that Jesus nicknamed Satan. He's like, one guy, your pal, your buddy, your bro, you're the devil. To Peter, Peter's the devil. Peter sinks in the water. Peter cuts people's ears off because he can't control his emotions. Peter says, I will never deny you. And Jesus says, but you know what? By the time the rooster crows twice, you will have denied me 3 times. Rooster crows just before. The rooster crows just after Peter denies him for the 3rd time, cursing and cussing, declaring with all vehement emotion, I do not know him. And yet now we have 1 Peter and 2 Peter. We have the Gospel of Mark, who was a disciple of Peter's. And the reason we have the book of Mark is not because Mark was a follower, but because Peter was, and he said, Mark, write this down. This is what happened. The cowardly disciples who all fled became the most powerful evangelists the world has ever known. Thomas himself, who doubted until Jesus said, here, feel my hands, feel my side. Put your hand there, man. Now what you going to do? He's like, I'm going to India. And Thomas went and took the gospel to an entire continent in Asia. And the gospel spread. The fanatic Jewish persecutor of Christians, Paul, became an apostle and a writer of 2/3 of the New Testament after the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're not talking about blind faith. We're talking about intelligent faith. We are not stupid, foolish people. To the wisdom of men, yes, the power of God might appear foolish to the wisdom of men because they're not using their heads. They're trying to connive and trick you out of believing. The devil can only get you to be an unbelieving person by blinding your mind from the light of the gospel. He can't stop the gospel. He can't stop it being spread. So he uses all of his power not to keep you from getting saved, because he couldn't even do that, but to try to blind your mind from the glory so that you only see it as a religion rather than see it as a glorious relationship with God. Because we are not building our life upon a myth and hoping that Jesus rose from the dead. We're changed because he rose from the dead. We're in church on Sunday because he rose from the dead. The world, the devil is shuffling shells trying to get your mind off of the resurrection and on some candy. I'm trying to tell you, you're smarter than you realize. Your faith is not in a blind belief. It doesn't glorify God because you believe something that can be proven contrary. It glorifies God when you believe what cannot be disproven factually, and that is the resurrection of Jesus. The greatest scholars, Professor Thomas Arnold, author of the 3-volume History of Rome, he was the holder of the chairmanship of modern history at Oxford University, not Oxford Prison. Oxford University. He said this, quote, I know of no other fact in the history of mankind which has been proven by better and fuller evidence than the great sign that God gives, that Jesus Christ died and rose from the dead. English scholar Brooke Foss Westcott said, taking all the evidence together, it is not too much to say that there is no historic incident better or more variously supported than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Dr. Simon Greenleaf, Royal Professor of Harvard Law, years ago, examined the entire value of historic evidence concerning the resurrection of Jesus and came to this conclusion, and I quote, according to the laws of legal evidence used in the courts of law, there is more evidence for the historical fact of the resurrection of Jesus than any other event in human history.